The envelope was yellowed at the edges, hidden beneath a stack of old photographs in the bottom drawer of her dresser. I had avoided that drawer for 8 months. 8 months since the funeral, since the hospital room went silent, since I last heard her voice say my name. But that morning something pulled me toward it. Maybe it was the date. Our anniversary would have been tomorrow. 23 years. I sat on the bedroom floor, the autumn light filtering through the curtains she had chosen, and my hands trembled as I turned the envelope over. My name was written across the front in her handwriting, that familiar slant to the letters, the way she always made the capital letters just a little too large. The seal was still intact. She had written this knowing I would find it only after she was gone. I don't know how long I sat there before I could open it. Minutes, maybe, or an hour. Time had stopped meaning much to me anymore. When I finally slid my finger under the flap, the sound of tearing paper seemed too loud in the empty house. Inside was a single sheet, folded once. I could see ink through the paper, her words waiting. My chest tightened. I unfolded it slowly, and the first line hit me like a wave. My dearest, if you're reading this, I'm already gone, and I hope you've been gentle with yourself. I had to stop. My vision blurred, and I pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes. She was here again in this room in these words. I could almost hear her voice, that particular warmth she carried, the way she spoke as if she was letting you in on a secret, meant only for you. I forced myself to keep reading. She wrote about our life together, about the small moments she treasured most, the Sunday mornings with coffee in bed, the way I used to hum while cooking, the evening walks we took through the neighborhood. She wrote about her fear of leaving me alone, about the guilt she felt even though the illness wasn't her choice. And then, near the end, came the line that made my hands shake again. Please love again. Don't let guilt keep you from living. I need you to know that loving someone new doesn't erase what we had. It honors it. I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. Anger flared up, hot and unexpected. How could she ask that of me? How could she think I could just move on? As if 23 years could be followed by something else, someone else. The house felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. I needed air. I needed to move. I grabbed my jacket and left, the letter still clutched in my hand, and I found myself walking toward the park, the one where we used to go, the one where I proposed to her under the oak tree near the pond. The park was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that comes with late October when the leaves are turning and most people are indoors. The sky was overcast, heavy with the promise of rain, and the air smelled like earth and decay, that particular autumn scent. I walked the familiar path without thinking, my feet knowing the way, past the playground now empty, past the benches where we used to sit and watch the ducks. I hadn't been here since before she got sick, since before the hospital visits became the center of our lives. It felt like walking into a memory, like the park existed only in some sealed-off part of my mind. I stopped at our bench. Someone had carved new initials into the wood, layered over the old marks. I sat down and pulled the letter out of my jacket pocket, reading it again. Please love again. The words felt impossible. They felt like a betrayal, even though I knew she had written them out of love. I looked out at the pond, at the ducks gliding across the dark water, and I felt the weight of the past 8 months settle over me like a heavy coat. The loneliness, the silent dinners, the way I still set 2 coffee cups out in the morning before remembering. That's when I heard her voice. Not my wife's, someone else's. A woman's voice, soft and a little uncertain, coming from somewhere to my left. Excuse me, is this bench taken? I looked up. She was standing a few feet away, holding a paperback book in one hand and a to-go cup of coffee in the other. She had dark hair pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore a burgundy scarf that reminded me of something, though I couldn't place what. Her eyes were kind but cautious, like she wasn't sure if she should have spoken at all. I shook my head and gestured to the space beside me. No, please. My voice sounded rough, unused. She sat down, leaving a respectful distance between us, and opened her book. I folded the letter and put it away, suddenly self-conscious. We sat in silence for a while, and I noticed small things, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the faint scent of vanilla from her coffee, the worn cover of her book. It was a collection of poetry. I could see the title, Love and Loss Collected Poems. After a few minutes, she spoke again, not looking at me. "This is a beautiful spot. I come here sometimes when I need to think." Her voice had a slight tremor to it, like she was fighting some emotion of her own. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Then she added, almost to herself, "My husband used to say that watching the water helps. He said it reminds us that life keeps moving, even when we think it's stopped." The word "used to" hung in the air. I turned to look at her, and she was staring at the pond with an expression I recognized, the look of someone who has lost something irreplaceable. "He passed away?" I asked quietly. She nodded, her fingers tightening around the book. 2 years ago. Cancer. The word was so familiar it hurt. My wife had died of cancer too, and hearing it from this stranger's lips felt like an echo, like the universe was holding up a mirror. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. She smiled a little, a sad smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you. It gets easier, they say. Different anyway." We fell into silence again, but it felt less heavy now, shared. After a moment she asked, "What about you? You look like you're carrying something." I almost didn't answer. I had gotten so used to keeping it all inside, to nodding politely when people asked how I was doing, and then moving on. But something about this moment, this stranger who knew loss the way I did, made me speak. "My wife," I said, 8 months ago." She turned to face me then, and her expression softened with understanding. "I'm so sorry." Those simple words, said by someone who truly knew, broke something open in me. I felt the pressure building behind my eyes, and I had to look away. "I found a letter today," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "She left it for me. She told me to love again, to not let guilt keep me from living." I laughed, but it came out bitter. "How am I supposed to do that?" The woman was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "My husband left me a letter too. He told me not to waste the years I had left. He said I was too stubborn to listen to anyone else, so he was writing it down." She smiled, a real smile this time, tinged with sadness and something like affection. I hated him for it at first. I thought, how dare he tell me how to grieve? How dare he ask me to move on when he was the one leaving? She paused, looking down at her book. "But I think he knew me better than I knew myself. He knew I would bury myself in the past if he didn't give me permission to let go." I felt something shift inside me, a small crack in the wall I had built. "Did it work? The letter?" She shrugged. "I'm still here, aren't I? Still trying to figure it out. Some days are harder than others, but I think he was right. Loving again doesn't mean forgetting. It just means we're still alive, and that matters." A gust of wind blew across the pond, sending ripples across the water and rustling the leaves around us. I pulled my jacket tighter and realized I was cold, but I didn't want to leave. I didn't want this conversation to end. "I'm David," I said, extending my hand. She took it, her grip warm and firm. "Claire." We sat there on that bench for another hour, talking in the way people do when they recognize something fundamental in each other. She told me about her husband, a high school teacher who loved classic rock and terrible puns. I told her about my wife, about her love of gardening and the way she always sang in the shower, off-key and joyful. We talked about the small things we missed, the sounds, the routines, the presence of another person in the house. And we talked about guilt, about the weight of surviving when someone you love didn't. As the afternoon wore on and the sky grew darker, threatening rain, Claire stood to leave. "I should get going before the weather turns," she said, tucking her book into her bag. I nodded, feeling a strange reluctance to let her go. "Will you be here again?" I asked, then immediately felt foolish. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I come most Thursdays, around this time. If the weather's decent," I nodded, committing that to memory. "Maybe I'll see you then." She gave a small wave and started down the path, her burgundy scarf trailing behind her in the wind. I sat there after she left, watching the ducks and thinking about the letter in my pocket. I thought about what my wife had asked of me, and I thought about Claire, about the way grief had connected us even though we were strangers. When the first drops of rain began to fall, I stood and walked home, and for the first time in 8 months the house didn't feel quite so empty. I made dinner, just for myself, and I ate at the table instead of standing at the counter. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. That night I reread my wife's letter. I focused on different parts this time, beyond the line that had shaken me. She wrote about gratitude, about how lucky she felt to have had the life we built together. She wrote about her hope that I would find joy again, in whatever form it took. "You have so much love to give," she had written. "Don't keep it locked away. Let it out. Let yourself be surprised by what comes next." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer of my nightstand, within reach but no longer hidden. The next Thursday, I found myself back at the park. I told myself I was just taking a walk, getting some air, but I knew the truth. I was hoping to see Claire. The weather was clearer this time, the sun breaking through the clouds in patches, and the park was busier. I walked to our bench. I had started thinking of it that way, and found it empty. I sat down and waited, feeling both hopeful and foolish. What if she didn't come? What if I had imagined the connection, read too much into a brief conversation between two grieving people? But then I saw her, walking down the path with the same book in her hand and a different scarf, this one blue. When she spotted me, her face lit up with recognition and she quickened her pace. "You came back," she said as she sat down, and there was a note of relief in her voice, like she had been hoping for the same thing. "I did," I said, feeling oddly nervous. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about the letters." She nodded, setting her book down between us. "I've been thinking about it too, about how strange it is that we both found letters, about how we both ended up here." We fell into conversation more easily this time, like we were picking up a thread from the week before. She told me she worked as a librarian, that she spent her days surrounded by stories, but found it hard to focus on reading herself. I told her I was an architect, that I used to love designing homes but had taken a leave of absence after my wife got sick and never really returned. We talked about work and loss and the strange ways life unfolds, and somewhere in the middle of it all she laughed, a real genuine laugh at something I said, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in months. Not quite joy, not yet, but something close. The possibility of joy. As we talked, I noticed things about her. The way she listened with her whole body, leaning in slightly when I spoke. The way she absent-mindedly twisted her wedding ring. She still wore it, just like I still wore mine. The way she paused before answering certain questions, as if weighing her words carefully. These small observations felt intimate, like I was learning a new language, and I realized with a mix of guilt and wonder that I was interested in her. Not as a replacement for my wife, nothing could ever replace her, but as someone entirely new, someone with her own story and her own scars. At one point, Claire pulled a bookmark out of her book, and I noticed it was actually a postcard, old and worn. "May I?" I asked, gesturing to it. She handed it over, and I saw it was a vintage postcard of the park, dated from the 1950s. "I found it at an estate sale," she explained. "My husband and I used to collect old postcards. After he died, I kept finding them in weird places, tucked in books, in coat pockets, in the glove compartment of the car. It was like he was leaving me little reminders." She paused, her voice catching. "This one I found in a poetry book I bought at a used bookstore. It was tucked in the section about renewal and second chances." I turned the postcard over in my hands, studying the faded image of the pond and the trees. "Do you think it means something?" I asked. "The timing of finding it, I mean." She shrugged, but I could see the flicker of something in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or the desire to believe in meaning. I used to be a skeptic about that kind of thing, but now I don't know. Maybe some things are just coincidences, or maybe we notice the coincidences that matter to us. She took the postcard back and used it to mark her place in the book again. Either way, it brought me here, and I'm glad it did. We sat there as the sun began to sink lower, casting long shadows across the grass. A cold wind picked up, and Claire shivered. Without thinking, I took off my jacket and offered it to her. She hesitated, then accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you." The gesture felt charged with meaning, too intimate and too simple all at once. We were just two people sharing a bench, sharing a jacket, but it felt like more. It felt like the beginning of something neither of us had planned for. Before she left that day, Claire asked if I wanted to exchange numbers. "In case one of us can't make it on a Thursday," she said, but we both knew it was about more than that. I typed my number into her phone, my fingers clumsy on the screen, and she sent me a text so I'd have hers. When I walked home that evening, her jacket still smelled faintly of vanilla, and I felt the guilt creep back in. What was I doing? Was this a betrayal? I thought about my wife's letter, about her words. Please love again. But knowing what she wanted intellectually and feeling permission emotionally were two different things. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I continued to meet at the park every Thursday. Sometimes we talked for hours, sometimes we sat in comfortable silence, just reading or watching the water. We shared stories about our spouses, about the lives we had lived and lost. She told me about her husband's terrible singing voice and his love of old movies. I told her about my wife's obsession with organizing everything in the house by color and her insistence on naming every plant in the garden. These stories didn't hurt the way they used to. With Claire, they felt like a kind of honoring, a way of keeping our loved ones alive without being trapped by their absence. One Thursday in early November, as the first frost settled on the grass, Claire brought a thermos of hot chocolate. We sat bundled in coats and scarves, passing the thermos back and forth, and she asked me about the letter my wife had written. "Have you thought more about what she said? About loving again?" I cupped my hands around the warm thermos, buying time. "Yes," I admitted. "I think about it constantly. But I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'll ever be ready." Claire nodded, her expression understanding. "I don't think anyone is ever really ready. I think we just reach a point where the fear of staying stuck becomes bigger than the fear of moving forward." Her words stayed with me long after that afternoon. I started to notice changes in myself, small shifts that I hadn't planned. I started cooking real meals again instead of just reheating leftovers. I started sleeping through the night without waking up, reaching for someone who wasn't there. I started looking forward to Thursdays with an anticipation that felt almost like guilt, but also like life. And I started to realize that my wife had known me better than I knew myself. She had known that I would need someone to give me permission, to tell me explicitly that it was okay to keep living. One Thursday in mid-November, I arrived at the park to find Claire already there, but she wasn't alone. An older woman sat beside her on the bench, and they were deep in conversation. When Claire saw me, she waved me over, and I approached hesitantly, not wanting to intrude. "David," Claire said, her voice bright, "I want you to meet someone. This is Margaret. She was a close friend of my husband's from his teaching days." The older woman extended her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. She had keen eyes that seemed to take me in with one glance. "It's nice to meet you," I said, shaking her hand. Margaret smiled, a knowing smile that made me feel like I was missing something. "Claire has told me about you," she said, "about your conversations here." I glanced at Claire, wondering what exactly she had shared, but she just looked back at me with a gentle expression. Margaret stood, gathering her purse. "I'll leave you two to your afternoon, but David, I wonder if you might spare a few minutes to walk with me. There's something I'd like to show you." I looked at Claire, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead. I'll wait here." I walked with Margaret down the path toward the pond, my curiosity growing. She moved slowly, leaning slightly on a cane, and we walked in silence for a moment before she spoke. "Did Claire tell you how we really met?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not really. She just said you were a friend of her husband's." Margaret nodded. "That's true, but I'm also the one who gave her that poetry book, the one with the postcard." She paused to catch her breath, and we stopped near the edge of the pond. Her husband, before he died, asked me to do something for him. He asked me to watch over Claire, to help her when the time was right. He knew she would struggle with moving forward. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November wind. "What are you saying?" Margaret smiled gently. "He left me a series of notes, David. Instructions. He asked me to place that postcard in a book he thought Claire would pick, in a bookstore she frequented. He asked me to encourage her to come back to this park, to their special place. He wanted her to be ready when she met someone who might understand. She looked at me directly then. And your wife did something similar, didn't she? She left you that letter, those specific words, because she knew you needed explicit permission. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You're saying this was planned? That they somehow orchestrated this? Margaret shook her head. Not orchestrated. They couldn't control the details, couldn't predict who you might meet or when. But they knew you both well enough to give you what you needed. A push, a permission slip, a reason to be open when the opportunity came. Your meeting Claire was chance, but your being here, in this park, at this time, open to connection, that was their gift to you both. I felt my eyes burn with tears. I don't know what to say. Margaret patted my arm. You don't have to say anything. Just think about it. Think about what it means that two people who loved you both so much wanted this for you. They wanted you to live, David. They wanted you to be happy. She started to walk back toward the bench where Claire waited, and I followed, my mind spinning. When we rejoined Claire, Margaret said her goodbyes and left us alone, and I sat down heavily on the bench. She told you, didn't she? Claire said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. I found out last week. Margaret finally told me the whole story, about the book, the postcard, all of it. She turned to face me, her eyes searching mine. I didn't know if I should tell you. I was afraid you'd think it was manipulative or that it would change how you saw me. I shook my head. No. I think it's beautiful. And heartbreaking. And exactly what they would have done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wife's letter, which I had started carrying with me again. May I read you something? Claire nodded, and I unfolded the worn paper. I skipped to the part I wanted to share, the part I had been thinking about constantly. She wrote, I know you, my love. I know you'll carry guilt like a weight, but I'm asking you to put it down. I'm asking you to trust that loving me and loving again are not opposites. They're both acts of courage. They're both ways of saying yes to life. My voice broke on the last words, and Claire reached over and took my hand. Her touch was warm, solid, real. We sat there holding hands, two people who had been given permission to live by the ones who loved us most. That night, I went home and wrote a letter of my own. I wrote to my wife, telling her everything, about finding her letter, about the anger and guilt I had felt, about meeting Claire in the park, about learning what she and Claire's husband had tried to do for us. I wrote about the fear that still lived in me, the fear that moving forward meant leaving her behind, and I wrote about the gratitude I felt for her love, for her foresight, for her understanding of who I was and what I would need. You knew me so well, I wrote. You always did, and you're right. I am stubborn, and I do carry guilt, but I'm trying. I'm trying to honor you by living. I'm trying to be brave enough to say yes to what comes next. I sealed the letter in an envelope and drove to the cemetery where she was buried. It was late, nearly midnight, and the gates were closed. But I parked outside and walked to the fence. I could see her headstone from there, a simple granite marker under an oak tree. I stood in the cold and spoke out loud, my breath misting in the air. I found your letter, I said, and I'm trying to do what you asked. I met someone. Her name is Claire, and she understands. She's been where I am. And I think I might want to know her better. I think I might want to try. The words felt huge, impossibly significant, but also right. I love you, I said. I'll always love you, but I'm going to try to love again too. Thank you for giving me permission. I placed the letter I had written on the ground outside the fence, weighing it down with a smooth stone I found nearby. The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches of the oak tree, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice carried on it, that familiar warmth. Be happy, it seemed to say. Just be happy. I stood there a few minutes longer, then turned and walked back to my car. As I drove home through the empty streets, I felt something loosen in my chest, a tightness I hadn't fully realized was there. It wasn't closure. I had learned there was no such thing as real closure in grief, but it was something. It was movement. The next Thursday, I went to the park with a purpose. I brought coffee for both of us and a small potted plant, a succulent that needed almost no care. When I saw Claire approaching, I felt my heart rate pick up, nervous and alive. She smiled when she saw me, and I handed her the coffee and the plant. "What's this?" she asked, laughing a little. "A gift," I said. "Or maybe a question. I was thinking, maybe we could meet somewhere other than this park next week, maybe for dinner." The words came out rushed, clumsy, but they were out there now, impossible to take back. Claire looked at the plant, then at me, and her smile softened into something tender. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd really like that." We sat on our bench, but it felt different now. The space between us felt charged with possibility instead of just shared grief. We talked about neutral things, books she was reading, a project I was thinking about returning to at work. But underneath it all was the acknowledgement of what we were both choosing. We were choosing to try. We were choosing to honor our pasts by building toward a future. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Claire said something that stayed with me. "I used to think that moving on meant forgetting, that if I let myself be happy again, I was somehow betraying what I had. But I'm starting to realize that's not true. The love we had doesn't go away just because we choose to love again. It becomes part of who we are, part of what we bring to whatever comes next." She looked at me, her eyes bright. "Does that make sense?" I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. "It makes perfect sense." When we parted that day, I kissed her on the cheek, just a brief, gentle touch, and she squeezed my hand in response. As I walked home, I thought about my wife, about the letter, about the elaborate gift of love she had left me. She had known that I would need someone who understood loss, someone who wouldn't expect me to be who I was before. She had known that guilt would hold me back unless someone I loved gave me explicit permission to move forward. And in her wisdom and her love, she had given me that permission, knowing I might not take it unless it came from her. I realized then that grief and love are not opposites. They're two sides of the same experience, two ways of holding what matters. My grief for my wife would always be with me, a permanent part of my landscape, but so would my capacity for love, for connection, for joy. And somehow, impossibly, both could exist in the same space. I could grieve what I had lost and still be open to what might come. I could honor my past and still build a future. It wasn't betrayal. It was the most profound act of love I could offer to both my wife and to myself. Over the following weeks, Claire and I began to build something new. We went to dinner at a small Italian restaurant she loved. We took walks in different parts of the city, exploring neighborhoods neither of us had visited in years. We went to a bookstore and spent hours browsing, eventually sitting in the cafe section reading passages to each other. We were slow, careful, respectful of our own boundaries and each other's. Neither of us was rushing toward anything. We were just allowing space for whatever might grow between us. One evening, as we sat in my living room drinking tea, Claire asked about the photographs on the mantel. I had kept them all there. Wedding photos, vacation snapshots, candid moments captured over 23 years. "Tell me about this one," she said, pointing to a photo of my wife laughing, her head thrown back in pure joy. I picked up the frame and looked at it, feeling the familiar ache, but also something new, a warmth, a fondness that didn't hurt quite so much anymore. "That was taken in Mexico on our 10th anniversary, I said. She had just tried surfing for the first time and completely wiped out, but she was laughing so hard she could barely stand. Claire smiled, studying the photo. "She looks like she was full of light," I nodded. She really was. Claire reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you kept these up. I kept all of John's photos too. So I used to worry that any man I might meet would be uncomfortable with them, would want me to put them away. But they're part of my story, part of who I am." I looked at her, this woman who understood in ways most people couldn't, and I felt a surge of gratitude. "I wouldn't want you to put them away," I said. "They're important. He's important. just like she is. We talked that night about what we were building, about what it meant to love after loss. We talked about fear and hope, about the ways we were both changed by what we had been through, and we talked about our loved ones, about the gifts they had left us, about the strange and beautiful ways they had tried to help us find each other. "Do you think they would have liked each other?" Claire asked. "Our spouses, I mean, if they had met." I considered the question, picturing my wife and Claire's husband in the same room. I think they would have. I think they would have understood each other, and I think they would have approved of this, of us trying. Claire nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "John would have liked you. He would have appreciated that you're patient, that you don't try to rush me or fix me, that you just sit with me in it." She paused, then added quietly, "And I think he would be grateful that I found someone who won't let me give up on happiness." I pulled her close, wrapping my arm around her shoulders, and we sat there in silence, two people learning to trust in the possibility of new beginnings. As winter settled in and the park became too cold for our Thursday meetings, Claire and I found other places to spend time together. We went to museums on quiet weekday afternoons. We cooked dinner together in my kitchen, teaching each other recipes our spouses had loved. We celebrated the holidays carefully, acknowledging that they would never be easy, but finding small joys where we could. And through it all, we were gentle with each other and with ourselves, understanding that healing isn't linear, that grief comes in waves, even when you think you've found solid ground. One night in late December, Claire stayed late at my house, and we were sitting by the fireplace when she suddenly said, "I'm scared, David." I looked at her, seeing the vulnerability in her expression. "Of what?" She gestured between us. "Of this, of caring about you, of what it means. Because if I let myself really love you, and something happens, I don't know if I could survive losing someone again." Her voice cracked, and I saw the tears spill over. I pulled her close, holding her while she cried, feeling my own eyes sting with sympathetic tears. "I'm scared too," I admitted when she had calmed down a little. "Every day I'm scared. But I'm also learning that fear is just part of it, part of being alive, part of caring about anyone or anything. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the fear means it matters." I pulled back enough to look at her face. "We can go as slow as you need. We can take this one day at a time. There's no rush, no expectations. Just whatever feels right." Claire nodded, wiping her eyes. "One day at a time," she repeated, like a promise. In late January, on what would have been my 24th wedding anniversary, I went back to the cemetery. I brought flowers, white lilies, which had been my wife's favorite, and I sat on the ground beside her headstone, not caring about the cold or the damp earth. "I wanted to tell you something," I said out loud, my voice carrying across the empty cemetery. "I'm doing what you asked. I'm loving again. Her name is Claire, and she's kind and smart, and she understands this in ways I never thought anyone could. And I wanted you to know that it doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like the most loving thing I could do. For you, for me, for her." I traced my fingers over the engraved letters of her name. "I miss you every single day. That hasn't changed. But I'm also grateful for what we had, for what you left me, for the wisdom and love you showed even in your final months. You gave me a gift and I'm trying to honor it." The wind picked up swirling snow around the headstone, and I felt that same sense of presence, of blessing. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything, for loving me enough to let me go." When I got home, Claire was waiting on my front porch, bundled in a thick coat and holding a thermos. "I thought you might need some company today," she said simply. I felt something break open in my chest, not pain, but overwhelming gratitude. This woman, who had her own grief to carry, had shown up for mine. I kissed her then, really kissed her for the first time, and it felt like stepping off a cliff and finding solid ground, like choosing life when it would have been easier to stay safely in the past. That night, we sat together on the couch, her head on my shoulder, and I thought about all the small moments that had led to this one: the letter hidden in a drawer, the walk to the park, the woman on the bench, the revelation of what our spouses had tried to do for us. Each moment had been a choice, a small step towards something new. And I realized that this was what my wife had meant. This was living. Not forgetting, not replacing, but allowing life to surprise you, to offer you gifts you didn't know you needed. Over the months that followed, Claire and I continued to build our relationship with patience and care. We had hard days, anniversaries and birthdays and random Tuesdays when grief hit unexpectedly, but we had good days too. Days when we laughed until our sides hurt. Days when we introduced each other to our friends and families who welcomed us with understanding and support. Days when we simply existed together in comfortable silence, reading in the same room or cooking side by side. One warm evening in early April, nearly a year after I had found my wife's letter, Claire and I returned to the park. Spring had transformed it, filling the trees with new leaves and the air with the scent of fresh growth. We walked to our bench and sat down, watching the ducks glide across the pond. "Do you remember the first time we met here?" Claire asked. I nodded. "I remember thinking you looked like you were carrying the weight of the world." She smiled. "You were. We both were. But it's lighter now, isn't it? The weight." I thought about her words. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but it no longer defined every moment of every day. I had learned to carry it differently, to make room for other emotions alongside it. Joy, hope, love. "It is lighter," I agreed, "but not because I've forgotten, because I've learned to live with it, because I found someone who understands." I took her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. "Because of you." Claire leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. I thought about my wife's letter, about the simple but profound request she had made. Please love again. I had done it. Not easily, not without struggle, but I had done it. And in doing so, I had honored her memory in the most meaningful way possible, by continuing to live fully, by remaining open to connection, by choosing courage over fear. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own capacity for love and healing, I invite you to subscribe for more stories about the human heart, about loss and hope, about grief and resilience, about the unexpected ways life offers us second chances when we're brave enough to take them. Because these stories matter. They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles, that healing is possible, and that love, in all its forms, is worth the risk.